This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. It was a day destined to be engraved not merely in the chronicles of motorsport, but deep within the spirit of Formula One. An unforgettable day when history, emotion, and legacy collided at full speed. April 26, 2025. A day when the racing universe stopped in its tracks, when even the most jaded fans felt their throats tighten and their eyes mist over. It was the day Sir Lewis Hamilton, the transcendent icon, the force of nature who reimagined what was possible behind the wheel, announced to a stunned, breathless world that the 2025 season would be his final voyage in Formula One. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. There was no theatricality, no meticulously choreographed spectacle to cushion the emotional blow. No fireworks. No soaring orchestras. No self-congratulatory video montages. Just authenticity. Just Lewis, raw, vulnerable, profoundly human. And that somehow made it infinitely more monumental. The setting itself seemed chosen by fate. Under the slightly brooding melancholic skies of the Shanghai International Circuit, a track where Hamilton had once orchestrated masterclasses in dominance, he stood alone, bathed in the deep crimson hue of his Ferrari race suit. The brilliant red contrasted dramatically against the dull gray sky, making him appear almost otherworldly, as though he were both part of this world and transcendent of it. When he finally spoke, his voice, usually a model of clarity and control, wavered like a candle in the wind. "This season," he murmured, pausing as if the weight of 17 relentless resplendent years pressed down upon him, "will be my final chapter in Formula One. I have lived out my dreams to their fullest. Now, it's time to pursue new horizons." In that fraction of a second, the pulse of the paddock, and indeed the pulse of the world, seemed to skip a beat. In garages, pit crews froze mid-task, spanners slipping from greasy fingers. In media centers, seasoned journalists who had chronicled thousands of Grand Prix let their pens fall motionless onto desks. Across team factories, screens that had once displayed tire temperatures and fuel loads now became windows to history in the making. In Tokyo, in Melbourne, in Johannesburg, in New York, wherever Formula One had touched hearts, a collective gasp echoed like a shockwave through the ether. Because Lewis Hamilton was never simply another driver. He was, and remains, a cultural force, a human phenomenon who transcended the narrow confines of sport. He was the pioneer who shattered centuries-old barriers, becoming the first black world champion in a discipline long seen as an impenetrable fortress of tradition. He was the courageous voice who spoke truth to power, who used his platform to advocate for racial equality, environmental awareness, and broader social justice, even when the walls of silence closed in around him. Statistically, he was a colossus. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. 7 world titles, each representing a chapter of blood, sweat, and breathtaking artistry. 103 Grand Prix victories, a number still growing, each one a masterclass in precision, strategy, and nerve. An avalanche of pole positions, fastest laps, and podium finishes, rewriting the record books so thoroughly that future generations would need new metaphors for excellence. Yet beyond the dizzying numbers, Hamilton embodied something more profound. A rare blend of elegance and ferocity. A heart as fierce as it was tender. An unwavering hunger to be better, not just faster. Behind the scenes, however, the decision to hang up his helmet had not materialized overnight. For months, perhaps even years, those closest to him had observed the internal struggle that no championship could resolve. His trusted inner circle, comprising confidants like Angela Cullen, the tactician Mark Hines, Ferrari's senior leadership, and even his old ally Toto Wolff, had borne silent witness to Hamilton's nightly wrestling matches with destiny. Although Ferrari had reignited the competitive inferno inside him, furnishing him with a machine capable of dancing at the sharp end of the field again, Hamilton had begun to perceive a different call. A deeper, almost spiritual yearning. He realized that true greatness was not only defined by the accumulation of titles and trophies, but by knowing when to step away with dignity, while still perched atop the summit. To leave while the echoes of applause still reverberated, rather than allow them to fade into whispers of what once was. Choosing to retire wasn't a surrender. It was the ultimate assertion of control, the final masterful move of a grand strategist who had spent his life playing a different game. As news of his retirement announcement spread, tributes cascaded in like a tidal wave. Across social media, hashtags trended globally within seconds. Hashtag thank you Lewis. Hashtag end of an era. Hashtag legend. Fellow drivers paused their own preparations, watching the announcement with misty eyes. Charles Leclerc, his Ferrari teammate, placed a comforting hand on Hamilton's shoulder as cameras zoomed in, capturing a moment heavy with emotion and respect. George Russell, once dubbed the heir apparent, shook his head in disbelief, his own dreams inextricably tied to the man who had paved the way. Even fierce rivals like Max Verstappen, who had engaged in legendary duels with Hamilton, offered words tinged with genuine reverence. And the fans? Oh, the fans. The millions who had followed every twist and turn of Hamilton's extraordinary journey, from the windswept karting tracks of Stevenage to the dizzying heights of Monza, Silverstone, Suzuka, poured out their love in an overwhelming global embrace. In classrooms and coffee shops, in living rooms and airport lounges, people stopped what they were doing to watch a piece of living history unfold. Some cried openly. Others simply sat in stunned silence, grappling with the realization that they were witnessing the end of a chapter they had hoped might last forever. Yet there is still racing left to be done. Still magic to be woven on the circuits of the world. Still opportunities for Lewis Hamilton to remind us why he is not just part of Formula One's story, he is the story. As the 2025 season unfolds, every race will carry an extra weight, an extra poignancy. Every qualifying session, every overtake, every podium celebration will be infused with a bittersweet sense of finality. Because when the final checkered flag falls, whether in Abu Dhabi, or wherever fate decides, the world will not merely be bidding farewell to a driver. It will be saying goodbye to a phenomenon, to a dream made flesh, to an architect of change who steered not just cars, but hearts and minds. Lewis Hamilton didn't merely conquer racetracks. He conquered history. And though he may soon step away from the cockpit, the legacy he forged, with courage, with brilliance, with unrelenting humanity, will continue to roar louder than any V6 turbo ever could. Forever. Not long after the seismic announcement that sent tremors through every corner of the Formula One world, Lewis Hamilton quietly slipped away from the pandemonium. While journalists shouted over one another, desperate for a quote, and camera flashes exploded like fireworks around the media center, Hamilton moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the paddock with deliberate calm. His destination was a private haven known only to a select few, Ferrari's exclusive driver suite, tucked away behind secured doors and guarded from the unrelenting chaos outside. The room he entered was cloaked in a subdued, almost reverent glow. Deep mahogany paneling lined the walls, and heavy crimson curtains muffled the outside world, casting long, solemn shadows across the polished marble floor. A faint scent of leather and old wood lingered in the air, mingling with the ever-present aroma of burnt rubber that somehow seemed to seep into every pore of the racetrack. It was a place designed for reflection, not for spectacle, and today, it would witness a moment few would ever see, yet none would ever forget. Seated on the edge of an elegantly crafted leather couch was Charles Leclerc. The Monegasque star, typically the picture of poise and youthful brilliance, now looked almost boyish, stripped of the armor he wore on the grid. His hands, usually so steady as they gripped the steering wheel at 300 km/h, now fidgeted nervously with the hem of his fireproof undershirt. His foot tapped an anxious rhythm against the floor, and his face, usually illuminated by an easy smile, was clouded by turmoil and uncertainty. As Hamilton entered, Leclerc immediately rose, then seemed to think better of it and sank back down, his composure faltering under the weight of the occasion. For a few agonizing seconds, neither man spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was dense, heavy with mutual respect, sorrow, and admiration that words could hardly capture. Finally, after drawing a steadying breath, Charles found the courage to speak. "Lewis," he began, but the name caught in his throat, the gravity of the moment pinning his voice down. He looked away, as if the act of meeting Hamilton's gaze might shatter whatever fragile composure he had left. Gathering himself, he pressed on, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? You're still the quickest. Every time we race wheel to wheel, I feel it. Everyone feels it. You haven't lost a thing." Hamilton studied him for a moment, his dark eyes warm and knowing. Then came that familiar sound, a soft, musical chuckle, imbued this time with a bittersweet quality that resonated deeply. It was a laugh that had echoed in victorious celebrations, intense post-race interviews, in unforgettable podium ceremonies, and now it filled the small room with something far more profound: acceptance. "I know, Charles," Hamilton said at last, his voice low but unwavering, rich with the wisdom of experience. I know I can still compete. I know I can still win. But there's more to life than holding on until your knuckles are white. It's about recognizing when the moment is right, when it's time to let go. It's about trusting that the legacy you've built will outlast you, that it will inspire long after you've left the stage. He paused, his gaze unfocusing slightly, as if watching a private reel of memories dance before him. The thunderous cheers from Silverstone, the defiant victories against the odds, the night spent wondering if history would remember him kindly. I've lived a dream bigger than anything I ever dared to imagine, he continued, his voice tinged with wonder. And it's time to open the door for others to dream even bigger. Leclerc blinked rapidly, his throat tightening against the rising tide of emotion. His mind raced with memories of being a wide-eyed boy in Monaco, plastering posters of Hamilton on his bedroom walls, of sitting with his father, watching Hamilton carve through the rain at Fuji, at Silverstone, at Interlagos, of whispering to himself that someday, maybe someday, he would race alongside the legend who seemed larger than life. And now, here he was. Standing not merely as a fan, but as a peer, one who would soon carry forward the very flame Hamilton had lit. You've done that, Lewis, Charles said, his voice firm despite the tremor underneath. You've changed everything. For all of us. For generations to come. The room seemed to breathe with the weight of those words. Beyond the thick walls, the symphony of the paddock played on, the distant whir of electric carts ferrying parts and personnel, the rhythmic clatter of tire guns packing up for the next venue, the muffled chatter of mechanics debriefing their day. But inside, none of it mattered. Here, there was only the sacred passing of an era. For a long moment, neither man moved. They simply existed in the stillness, two souls bound by a profound, unspoken understanding. Then, almost simultaneously, they rose to their feet. No grand speeches. No scripted theatrics. Just two warriors acknowledging the moment with the kind of dignity words could never fully convey. Hamilton extended his arms slightly, a quiet offer of brotherhood. Without hesitation, Leclerc stepped into the embrace, gripping him tightly, as if trying to absorb the strength, the wisdom, the spirit that had defined Hamilton's extraordinary journey. It was not a goodbye. It was a benediction. When they finally separated, Hamilton rested a hand on Leclerc's shoulder, his expression filled with quiet pride. "It's your time now," he said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. Leclerc nodded, unable to trust himself to speak. He understood. He felt it in his bones. The road ahead would not be easy, greatness never was, but he would walk it with the lessons Hamilton had etched into history itself. As Hamilton turned and walked slowly toward the door, a shaft of late afternoon light from a high window caught him, casting his silhouette long and noble against the crimson backdrop. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. And as the door clicked softly shut behind him, Charles Leclerc stood alone in the quiet, heart pounding, carrying within him the invisible torch that would light his own path, and illuminate a future that, thanks to Lewis Hamilton, was brighter than ever. Meanwhile, nestled deep within the legendary heart of Maranello, far from the flashes of cameras and the deafening roar of speculation, Frédéric Vasseur, the seasoned strategist and rugged architect behind Ferrari's triumphant renaissance, found himself engulfed in an internal tempest fiercer than any storm he had faced on track. Outwardly, to the casual observer, Vasseur exuded calm, that familiar French composure that had steered Ferrari back toward glory. But beneath the surface, his soul was torn, battered by a whirlwind of conflicting emotions he struggled to contain. For Vasseur, Lewis Hamilton was never just another high-profile acquisition, nor merely a multiple-time world champion to adorn Ferrari's legacy. Hamilton was a living phenomenon, a beacon of inspiration, a catalyst who had reignited the sacred flames of ambition and passion within the hallowed walls of Ferrari. Bringing Lewis to Maranello had not simply been a masterstroke of management, it had been a personal crusade, a relentless pursuit filled with whispered meetings, delicate negotiations, and nights spent pacing alone, imagining what could be. It wasn't just about the blistering speed Hamilton could deliver, it was about the symbolism, the seismic cultural and competitive shift he represented, a revolution Ferrari desperately needed. Now, in the heavy stillness following the seismic announcement of Hamilton's impending departure, the silence within Vasseur's office was almost unbearable. The air hung thick, almost suffocating, charged with a kind of electric sadness that precedes irrevocable change. The polished mahogany desk between them, usually littered with technical reports and race strategies, now stood empty, a silent witness to the moment unfolding. The door creaked open, and there he was, Lewis Hamilton, his presence as magnetic and commanding as ever, yet carrying an unmistakable weight in his eyes. Vasseur stood slowly, the leather of his chair sighing beneath him. His movements were deliberate, heavy, as if every gesture was bearing the burden of an era drawing to a close. His hands, so often steady in the most chaotic pitwall moments, now trembled almost imperceptibly. "You shattered my heart today, Louis," Vasseur managed, his voice thick with unspoken grief. His French accent, normally subtle, draped heavily over each syllable, betraying the raw emotion he could no longer conceal. His mouth curled into a weary, bittersweet smile, a fragile mask over the genuine sorrow threatening to overwhelm him. "But mon Dieu, you also made me immensely proud." Hamilton, moved beyond words, crossed the room in 2 long strides and laid a firm, comforting hand on the team principal's shoulder, a gesture rich with everything they both knew but could never fully articulate. Their connection had been forged not through contracts or trophies alone, but through a mutual faith, a shared vision, a dream that had demanded every ounce of their hearts. "Fred," Hamilton said, his voice low, carrying the sincerity of 1,000 podium speeches condensed into one moment, "you gave me back my soul. You reminded me why I ever dared to love this brutal, beautiful sport. Whatever I achieve next, it will always carry your fingerprints." They exchanged a long, knowing glance, where words failed but history spoke. It was a look that spanned every sleepless night, every excruciating loss, every euphoric victory they had shared. A silent promise: no matter where destiny took them next, what they had built together at Ferrari would be eternal. Behind the heavy wooden doors, however, a different reality was unfolding. The internal atmosphere at Scuderia Ferrari had subtly, yet irrevocably, shifted. Team meetings, once purely focused on telemetry, strategy updates, and developmental tweaks, had become almost elegiac in tone, part tactical session, part nostalgic farewell. Engineers, strategists, and pit crew members who had once maintained laser-sharp focus found themselves occasionally staring blankly at screens, lost in the bittersweet knowledge that they were living through the final chapters of something extraordinary. Some mechanics, hardened by years in the merciless grind of Formula One, found themselves battling emotions they rarely let surface. Many had idolized Hamilton long before donning the iconic Ferrari uniforms. Boys and girls who had once covered their bedroom walls with posters of the Britain conquering Monaco and Silverstone. Now they were his colleagues, his comrades, his trusted allies. And soon they would be his former team. One senior mechanic, speaking under the veil of anonymity, confessed to a reporter, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "It's like standing courtside during Michael Jordan's final season. You're witnessing something transcendent, something the world will talk about forever. And deep down, you just wish it could go on forever." The usually vibrant energy in the Ferrari garages took on a more reverent, almost sacred quality. Tools were handled with extra care. Hamilton's SF-24 was treated not just as a machine but as a relic, a living artifact of an era that would soon pass into legend. Some team members lingered late into the night, simply sitting near the car, running calloused hands across its meticulously sculpted bodywork, as if trying to etch the sensation into their memories. Photos were taken, quietly, discreetly. Not for social media fame, but for deeply personal reasons. Private time capsules to remember the days they had stood shoulder to shoulder with a living icon in the twilight of his Ferrari journey. Beyond Maranello, the paddock buzzed with a peculiar mixture of respect, disbelief, and envy. Rival team principals exchanged glances heavy with both admiration and opportunity. Journalists scrambled for scoops and quotes, sensing that they were chronicling the end of an era that would be analyzed and romanticized for decades to come. And among the tifosi, the most passionate, loyal, and sometimes unforgiving fanbase in all of motorsport, the reaction was raw and unfiltered. Piazza di Maranello overflowed with banners, flags, and emotional chants. Some wept openly, clutching their red scarves emblazoned with Hamilton's name. Others roared with pride, vowing that whatever came next, they would always cherish the magic Lewis had brought back to their beloved Scuderia. As the sun dipped below the rolling hills of Emilia-Romagna, casting long golden shadows over the Fiorano track, a single truth became undeniable: Lewis Hamilton's time at Ferrari was entering its final glorious act. Yet what he had sparked, the dreams he had dared to awaken, the pride he had resurrected, would outlive every engine, every record, every fleeting race weekend. Lewis Hamilton was leaving Maranello. But in spirit, in history, and in the hearts of all who witnessed it, he would never truly leave. The world of Formula One, an ecosystem defined by speed, competition, and relentless pursuit of perfection, was brought to an unexpected, reverent standstill. Across every corner of the paddock, from the glimmering hospitality suites to the grittier garages deep in the pit lane. A profound sense of awe and admiration permeated the air. Engineers paused mid-assembly, seasoned team principals momentarily set aside their strategic concerns, and even the most hardened journalists found themselves struggling to put into words the magnitude of what had just been announced. Lewis Hamilton, a name that had become synonymous with excellence, resilience, and transformation, had signaled that the final chapter of his illustrious career was about to be written. It wasn't merely the announcement that captured the collective breath of the sport, it was the symbolism, the emotional gravity behind it. It was the realization that an era, defined by audacity, innovation, and unbreakable spirit, was drawing to a close. Old rivals, many of whom had once waged some of the fiercest, most bitter battles against Hamilton on the asphalt battlegrounds of Monaco, Monza, and beyond, reacted in ways few could have predicted. Grudges that had once seemed immortal melted away, replaced by heartfelt gestures of respect and recognition. Fernando Alonso, the Spanish titan whose storied rivalry with Hamilton had once fractured the McLaren team, reached out privately. In a rare and touching moment, he sent Hamilton a personal voice message, his tone uncharacteristically tender. "You chose the perfect moment to bow out," Alonso said, his voice carrying a mixture of nostalgia and admiration. "The story you've written with your hands on the steering wheel is eternal. You've made history, now you get to own it." Sebastian Vettel, himself a four-time world champion and now a revered figure advocating for social and environmental causes, extended an invitation no one had anticipated. He offered to organize a secluded, intimate farewell gathering at his tranquil Swiss residence, far from the eyes of the public and media. Later, on social media, Vettel penned an open letter. "We were gladiators on the track, but comrades in spirit. Racing you is a privilege I'll tell my grandchildren about." Perhaps the most surprising gesture came from Nico Rosberg, Hamilton's former teammate and nemesis, whose rivalry had once boiled over into bitter animosity and public drama. Appearing live on Sky Sports, Rosberg's carefully maintained composure cracked. "Lewis pushed me to the absolute edge of my capabilities," he admitted, his voice catching with emotion. "He forced me to find gears within myself I didn't know existed. Even when it hurt beyond words, it was a blessing. I became who I am because I raced against Lewis." Meanwhile, the global fanbase, an unstoppable force spanning continents, cultures, and generations, erupted into action. Massive banners, hand-painted and digitally crafted alike, began appearing across the world's most iconic circuits. "Forever our champion. Thank you, Lewis. One last dance." From Silverstone to Suzuka, from Austin to Abu Dhabi, the stands shimmered with an overwhelming sea of purple, black, and silver, colors forever associated with Hamilton's extraordinary journey. Entire grandstand sections were swiftly designated as Hamilton tribute zones, where fans wore specially made merchandise, waved commemorative flags, and sang chants created spontaneously in his honor. In Brazil, a country that had embraced Hamilton as one of their own after his emotional homage to Ayrton Senna, street parades celebrating his legacy drew tens of thousands of passionate supporters. Even Ferrari, the storied scarlet-clad team that had fought against Hamilton for so many years, released an exclusive LH44 tribute collection. Limited edition apparel and memorabilia, hats embroidered with golden laurels, leather jackets bearing his signature, watches crafted with the number 44 subtly woven into their design, sold out globally within minutes, crashing online stores and creating secondary markets where prices skyrocketed. The rumor mill, ever fertile in Formula One's drama-laden world, went into hyperdrive. Whispers began circulating that the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, traditionally the curtain call for the season, would unveil an unparalleled fireworks display, a pyrotechnic tribute so grand it would be visible from space. Discussions emerged about permanently renaming Turn 8 at Silverstone in Hamilton's honor, Hamilton's Bend. Fans had already nicknamed it online, while unofficial petitions to retire the iconic number 44 number amassed hundreds of thousands of signatures seemingly overnight. Netflix's Drive to Survive, which had initially structured its latest season around the turbulent title battles and rising rookie stars, reportedly scrapped its narrative framework. Insiders revealed that the production team had pivoted entirely, working around the clock to transform the season into a chronicle of Hamilton's final tour, a living, breathing farewell to a titan of motorsport. Amidst this tidal wave of celebration and commemoration, Hamilton himself remained remarkably composed, but undeniably introspective. Gone was the media-trained veneer that often shrouded his interviews. Instead, a raw, vulnerable Lewis emerged, one willing to peel back the layers and show the world the human being beneath the 7 crowns. He spoke about Stevenage, the unassuming town where his dreams took root. About the tireless sacrifices of his father, Anthony Hamilton, who had juggled multiple jobs, tirelessly cleaning offices at night and working on the weekends just to fund young Lewis's karting ambitions. About his mother, Carmen, whose quiet strength had been his anchor through the storms. He talked candidly about the loneliness of being the first, and for a long time, the only black driver in a sport steeped in tradition, often resistant to change. About the casual prejudices he endured, the whispered doubts, the sometimes suffocating scrutiny that came with every move he made, both on and off the track. There were nights when I questioned if I truly belonged, Hamilton confessed in one particularly emotional interview. When the helmet came off, and the cameras stopped flashing, there were moments where I wondered if the fight was too big. But every time I climbed into the car, I carried more than just my own ambitions. I carried the dreams of millions who had never seen themselves reflected in this world before. Every race was for them. Every victory, a message, you can. He spoke of his deep gratitude for the journey, the triumphs and the defeats, the victories that crowned him and the losses that shaped him. He reminisced about Monaco pole laps where he felt he was flying, about Spa downpours where instincts took over, about championship battles where every millisecond mattered. As the days passed, it became increasingly clear, Lewis Hamilton's farewell was not merely the departure of a champion. It was the departure of a movement. A beacon of hope, of resilience, of change, was preparing to take its final bow. And as millions prepared to watch his last races with bated breath, one overwhelming sentiment echoed across the paddocks, the grandstands, and the world. They hadn't just witnessed a sportsman. They had witnessed a legend. They had witnessed a revolution. They had witnessed history being written in real time, by the hands of a dreamer who had once dared to believe that anything was possible, and then proved it to the entire world. As the championship calendar marched steadily toward its dramatic and inevitable crescendo, the races themselves evolved beyond mere competitions. They became grand ceremonies, vivid celebrations of a Titan's final campaign. Every event was a ritual, a magnificent send-off to one of the greatest icons Formula One had ever nurtured. Each Grand Prix turned into a living monument to a career that had reshaped the very definition of excellence. It wasn't simply motorsport anymore. It was theater, it was poetry, it was history unfolding in real time. In Monaco, under the blinding Mediterranean sun and the glint of the harbor's million-dollar yachts, Hamilton stepped into the principality not just as a driver, but as a living legend paying homage to the immortals who had paved the road before him. His helmet, a one-off masterpiece, was a stunning fusion of tributes to Ayrton Senna's audacity and Niki Lauda's relentless courage. The design glistened under the bright lights, intricate details telling a silent story of lineage and inspiration. As Lewis weaved his way through the serpentine streets, mere millimeters away from disaster at every corner, it felt as though he carried their spirits in the cockpit with him, an invisible weight that somehow made him lighter, faster, more sublime. Then came Silverstone, the spiritual home of British motorsport, and more importantly, the crucible where the boy from Stevenage had first dared to dream. This was not merely a home race. It was a pilgrimage. It was destiny circling back to where it all began. When Hamilton unleashed a jaw-dropping lap in qualifying, a perfect ballet of precision, aggression, and instinct, the grandstands exploded in euphoria. The sound was so ferocious, so elemental, that the earth itself trembled. Local seismic monitors, used to track geological shifts, registered the crowd's roar as a tremor. Fathers lifted their children onto their shoulders to see him. Elderly fans wiped away tears as they clutched battered old merchandise from decades past. Silverstone did not simply witness that lap, it absorbed it into its very soil. And then Monza, the legendary temple of speed. The cathedral where the Tifosi gather each year, clad in blood-red devotion, to worship the heroes who dare to tame its ferocious straights and daunting chicanes. Traditionally, their love was reserved for Italian-born gladiators or those who wore the sacred Ferrari badge. But this year, something extraordinary happened. Among the tidal wave of crimson flags and smoke flares, giant banners emerged, not of homegrown legends, but of Lewis Hamilton, shrouded in Ferrari scarlet, adorned with laurel wreaths, immortalized with angelic light. Grown men who had sworn eternal allegiance to Italian champions sobbed openly, hoisting banners that read, "Grazie Lewis." It was a surreal, almost mythical moment, an acknowledgement that greatness, true greatness, transcends borders, colors, and old loyalties. Through all of it, the adulation, the nostalgia, the seismic emotional weight, Hamilton did not waver. If anything, He ascended to a level of performance few had ever dared to imagine. It was as if the looming end had liberated him entirely. He drove without chains, without the invisible burdens of expectation. Every maneuver was pure instinct sharpened by decades of mastery. Pole positions arrived with almost contemptuous ease. Overtakes once thought impossible became routine, sweeping passes around the outside of high-speed corners, impossible late-braking moves that defied physics and belief. Every race was a tapestry woven with threads of genius and daring, every Sunday an opera of combustion and courage. Each circuit became a canvas, and Lewis Hamilton painted masterpieces in hues of scarlet, ebony, and silver. His driving wasn't just fast, it was transcendent. It was art. It was as though the very laws of nature bent slightly to accommodate the final chapters of his legend. His farewell journey was more than the close of a storied era. It was the coronation of a journey that had started humbly, on a rain-slicked kart track in rural England, and had risen through McLaren's furnace, flourished into an empire at Mercedes, and finally found mythological immortality under the banner of Ferrari. It was the realization of a boyhood dream that had bloomed into a universal epic. Hamilton's story served as a defiant reminder: real legends do not fade quietly into history's dusty tomes. They burn hotter and brighter with every heartbeat until the very last. They leave behind trails of light, fingerprints on the very atoms of existence, echoes in the wind and in the cheers of future generations who will speak their name in reverence. And somewhere, hidden in the quiet shadows of the Ferrari garage, long after the cameras had packed away, the fans had dispersed into the cooling night air, and the roar of engines had faded into memory, there was a simple, almost unnoticeable note tacked to the door of Hamilton's private locker. Written not with corporate polish but with trembling, heartfelt sincerity by an anonymous soul within the team. It said, "Legends never retire. They become eternal." In that simple line lived everything that words struggle to capture. Lewis Hamilton, the fearless boy, the history maker, the barrier breaker, the 7-time world champion, the artist behind the wheel, had crossed the final threshold. He had not merely retired. He had become eternal.